Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Small press crew.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Um, for those of you whose names I don't recognize, we are Center for Book Arts. We're founded in 1974, and we are the oldest nonprofit dedicated to uplifting and furthering the book arts through education, preservation, exhibition, art making, and community building. Um, so we're here today for the first of our 4 lectures for the Small Press Incubator program, which is a really unique opportunity, and this is the first year that it's running. And it's created for BIPOC writers and poets to create their own small presses. And the participants are here. If you guys want to like raise your hands or something, so everyone can be like, "Oh my God," everyone can see you. Um, Yes, so super exciting program. It's the first time that's running, and G is the one of our 4 mentors for the program. Um, and he's kicking off the lecture series. So G is an arts organizer, and he's currently based out of New York and is a curatorial assistant in the Department of Media and Performance at the Museum of Modern Art. Um, he has a really extensive background, and he's also the co-founder and board member of Ulyses, which is a nonprofit art bookshop based in Philadelphia. Um, so I'll leave it at that because I'm sure G has a lot to say about the kinds of things that he's been getting into. So yeah, without further ado, here's G.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Hi, everyone. So nice to see Ola, Sela, Ruby, Jasmine, see you again, and everyone else who can join. I have some slides, so I guess I can go ahead and share my screen. If you have any trouble viewing this, please, um, you can let me know and I'll adjust. Super honored and thrilled to be here. I'm very nervous. I don't know if it's because this is a very informal and intimate setting, so I don't know why I feel so nervous, but maybe it's because it's like this is where I give very intense kind of Zoom meeting like meetings. So maybe it's like the spectral energies of previous conversations in this seat. Um, yeah, just think I want to thank you guys at CBA for this invitation. It's really impressive and exciting how much you've all worked to shape this event, the whole lecture series, the small press incubator. Yeah, so Karina, Camilo, Tyler, thanks so much. Yeah, I feel like, often application processes can feel sort of all or nothing, where like, a huge selection of people apply and then only a few people can get the grant or the opportunity. So I think, that series and your intention to put it online is really special because it allows this broader scope of people to share in this experience and kind of follow along the way. Um, I Most of what I'm going to share is about how I sort of entered the field of kind of small press publishing and independent art publishing, which is the term I tend to use to describe this really amorphous, cloudy uh, spectrum of activities that happen in this space. And a lot of my experiences with this bookshop and art space called Ulyses. So this is what Ulyses looks like right now. This is the current location and space. Ulyses is a bookshop and it's a bit of a curatorial platform as well that was founded in 2006 by me and a number of friends, Lauren Downing, Ricky Yanis, Narissa Cooney, Kayla Romberger, and Joel Evie. Today, I'm part of Ulyses as a board member and of the nonprofit, but less involved with the kind of logistics and day-to-day of what fuels the project. So in this conversation, I was thinking that I could speak a bit to how we as a team kind of approached questions pertaining to communications and marketing in the first few years. But as a disclaimer, I'm a bit of an unexpected candidate to talk about that space. When it comes to social media and online communications, I actually don't have an Instagram, I don't have a Twitter, I don't have a Facebook presence. And as a group, I'd even say Ulises, we have a healthy degree of skepticism of some of the kind of neoliberal elements of marketing and how it functions in a highly consumption-based society like the US. But all that being said, I think what we are really excited about and have always been excited about is, growing and building a public. And I think, that's what's at the core of a lot of what it means to work in communications and to ask questions about it, as a form of storytelling and as a critical thinking practice for how you want to grow and enrich the people that you work with and support. So in this talk, I'm going to speak a bit about how we built this public that Ulises is a part of, partially through partnerships, how we created a presence in the arts community of Philadelphia. This is an image from our opening night when we launched the space in our original location. And also kind of how we forged partnerships and relationships with a larger community of art book publishing through participation in art fairs and events and presentations outside of Philadelphia. But, so in short, kind of like what we found successful in creating community. And I have a particular structure for how to approach that I'll talk a little bit about later. So what is Ulises? Ulises is a bookshop, as I mentioned. It's also a curatorial platform based in Philadelphia. We sell books by a range of folks, that include people who make zines, monographs, artists' books, independent art publications. And we, tend to focus on topics like contemporary art, curatorial practice, theory, design, architecture, and kind of related fields. We take our name for the shop from the work and legacy of Ulises Carrion, who was a Mexican artist who made mail art and video works and was really steeped in this kind of 1960s and 70s energy around conceptualism. We opened a bookshop in Amsterdam called Other Books and So, and we kind of named ourselves after the work of Ulises. We ourselves at Ulises, the shop, we're not publishers, nor do we run a press. But our work as a shop is definitely focused on what it means to support the people who make books. Sorry, I think I have some audio playing. I'm going to see if I can turn it down. Okay, I think, yeah, maybe it's fine. And then so yeah, we've made one publication in our lifespan as an organization, which is essentially a catalog for a 2-year project that we hosted in a space. The catalog is called Publishing as Practice, and it basically summarizes a residency that we held with these 3 artist book publishers, Hardworking Good Looking, Martine Sims, who runs the imprint Dominica, and Badoon. At the shop, we sell things that are zines and that happen to be like personal or frivolous or deeply political. But we also sell, the latest volumes by beloved publishers like Wendy Subway or 3 Dot Zine or Archive Books or Black Mass Publishing, just to give you a sense of the inventory and really a sense of our community. We launched the project out of this effort to fill an absence in the community of Philadelphia. We wanted to create a place where people could buy an international array of publishers who we loved, but we also wanted to create a space for artists and small press bookmakers who we knew sold artist multiples and zines, and a place where they could promote their work through launches and readings and exhibitions. So in that sense, this service and community were kind of some of our guiding values. And informing the project, we really were thinking also about how to impact the arts economy or ecology, I should say, of a place that was dear to us and provide a service that wasn't being fulfilled by some of the other models in Philadelphia, which, were largely artist-run galleries and nonprofits and museums and residencies in the city. So I kind of termed this talk Ulysses from A to Z or A to G. I stopped at G because this talk should only be so long, and I think it kind of um, ended in a place that felt where we were as a group. So I selected kind of a number of terms that define our work in some way and can potentially define maybe relate to some of your own work. And so they start off a bit abstract, but I think include some nuggets of specificity that talk to the mindset and intentions that we adopted in developing and communicating our work to the public. Um, so yeah, maybe with that, I'll kind of start with first. So A is for anti-institutional. So that's the first term that you can see on the screen. And this is like an idea, it's a made up word, I guess, maybe it's not, that's kind of been dear to our work at Ulyses. And, it's not a typo. The first term starts with this prefix anti, A-N-T-E, as in before or prior to, which, for me is kind of distinguished from the prefix anti, A-N-T-I, that prefix meaning kind of opposed or against. This image is of the space, the first space of Ulysses before it was built out. Um, I'm super attracted to this idea of like anti-institutional structures with an E, by which I mean, I'm interested in the kinds of structures of support and of community that and exchange that kind of proceed or take shape before a project becomes a formal institution or a formal organization. That interest, means that I'm less invested in being kind of opposed to institutional structures, like being opposed to museums or opposed to collections or opposed to official archives, but maybe simply invested in some of what's offered by the kind of nascent chapters of before a project is institutionalized. So the fluidity, the ambiguity, the ambivalences that can exist in that space. And a lot of those models tend to be things that are independent and small scaled, initiatives, artist-run spaces, or hyper-local projects. Sometimes they're things that might not even look like a organization per se, but rely on barter economies or gift exchanges or whisper networks and horizontal leadership models. And I think a lot of this interest in, before anti-institutional structures is because it's where presses like the kind that are supported by CBA and by Ulyses kind of operate, and for me, also this idea of like anti-institutionalism is reflects an interest in like the prehistories of an organization, like the moments that immediately precede when they become into formal creation, and how these structures are often consolidated not by like rules or by bylaws or policies, but instead, are brought together and held together by friendships or even misunderstandings or habitual associations, coincidence, sometimes flirtations and romances. So, anti-institutionalism for me is also distinct from this kind of dominant mode of anti-institutionalism, as in like opposition, where I think is a sentiment that pervades a lot of our public life today. It includes a skepticism of institutional structures and institutional expertise that in sometimes is warranted and sometimes is not, right? Like maybe the clearest example might be right-wing skepticism of like scientific, academic, and journalistic institutions. But then there's also a kind of left-wing distrust of military and corporate institutions that seems to me to have more justification historically. But then, I also think that, I'm someone who's conscious of like what it means to work in a way that doesn't lead to a debilitating distrust or an apathy or a withdrawal and a lack of cooperation. And I think that's also something that I love in these kind of moments of prehistories or before periods for organizational structures, is that in those moments they rely on trust and an investment and in commitment and cooperation and in the faith and potential of structures that are often like voluntary or personal. So why am I saying all of this? I think, that much of the success and survival of Ulysses is very much formed by this commitment to working in this kind of anti-institutional way as the anti of the before. It's rooted in this kind of commitment to these nascent stages of labor. And I would even say kind of going along with the work that you all are doing, a moment of incubation. We met each other about a year before we actually opened the space. And this is a screenshot from one of our meetings. We have a long hundreds of pages long Google document where we store a lot of ideas and agenda items for projects that we're working on. And this is a screenshot, I guess, from Zoom of us working late at night, trying to figure it all out. When we convened originally in this year before we opened, we didn't just hang out, probably hung out less than we do now on the meetings anyway. But we took, detailed minutes. We discussed questions about what books we would stock, what the vibe of the space would have, what it would look like. We made mood boards and have tons of folders of, Tumblr screenshots and Pinterest screenshots. And, we thought about our vision and mission statements and drafted that and, met with artists and art leaders in the city and other cities to ask them what kind of spaces they love, what kind of projects inspired them, and learned what kind of spaces the people in our community wanted and really set out to be that space. This is a screenshot from pages of, of the weekly agenda document, which, I'll say it doesn't always look this chaotic, but this is a particularly chaotic one. And then above that is like an email that exchange that Narissa Cooney and I had about, I think it was the first conversation we had about Ulyses when we were thinking about it as almost like a magazine shop and thinking about like other examples of projects that were inspirations to us. And I guess it was a chapter in my life where I sent much longer emails and spent much more time drafting them. But yeah, we also, oops, I skipped ahead. We also learned from the legacy of projects that came before us, obviously like Printed Matter and its like decades long history, Art Metropole, Ooga Booga, Perimeter Books, and kind of reached out to people who were actively involved in some way in those projects for advice. Wendy's Subway, Motto, but also like more recent examples like Golden Age, which Martine Sims founded. And, she was really supportive and gave us essentially this book that was an early, but I guess out of print or no longer exists, like a PDF of this book she made called Reference Work. That was essentially like a how-to for someone who was interested in creating like an entrepreneurial venture, all the things she wished she'd known about running a shop before opening Golden Age. And I think a lot of it extends to also to like this work of starting an independent publishing initiative. And it was really cool. She just kind of like sent us this PDF of like, 200-page document that, is things from excerpts, like a reader of excerpts from like business classes she had subsequently taken or things she had sourced. So kind of relying on that sort of moment the year before we opened to explore, and, we also, of course, looked to historical precedents. This is Ulises Carry On in his shop, Other Books and So, which ultimately led us to adopt the name Ulises when we opened the space, kind of thinking about this legacy that we wanted to continue and that we really felt indebted to. We voraciously considered, what made the work of other spaces special, thinking about everything from the furniture to the bookends to the inventory management system and web hosting services, and asking really precise questions about those things as those questions emerged. And you can see Ulises here in, the 70s in the shop, with a lot of the shop displayed front-facing publications as opposed to the spine out. They kind of emphasize the design elements of the publication and their sculptural and tactile and spatial qualities. And that was something we really admired as well and wanted to incorporate into our own work. So in these weekly sessions that in this year-long period before we opened, we argued over design decisions about the shop and, debated how to approach our public programming. But we also did a lot of hanging out too. And this process of hanging out was, obviously, and maybe not obviously, was, unsurprisingly, was really a critical practice. I have a really cheesy kind of thought that I often have is that like, yeah, curating is a time-based medium, that it requires this investment of time and commitment um, um, to connecting with people, and I think it was important in these moments that we built trust with each other. Right? We learned how each other's wanted to work together, how to make decisions together, what our strengths were, what our passions were, and also where we were ambivalent about things. I think one of the things that made Ulises as a collective project function well through over the years is that we had overlapping interests, but not overlapping expertise, so that like, Narissa could come up with this really cool creative design idea and bring it to us. And we'd all be like, this is awesome. We love it and be passionate about it. But then, Narissa could also have the space to kind of explore and develop that um, uh, on her own. And it wouldn't be like us stepping on each other's toes and kind of respecting each other's um, fascinations and passions and allowing folks to go down those rabbit holes. But yeah, we learned what it looked like when someone had doubts or concerns and wanted to change direction. And yeah, I think those kinds of things often only happen through time. But this before period was also like crucial, before we were a public facing project, um, because, before we had this inventory of books, we made, a small selection of print multiples on a risograph at the University of Pennsylvania, so that we could attend the Philadelphia Art Book Fair. So, this picture on the top right is me with like a bunch of risographs that we made and to go to the art book fair there and really promote and get out the word about this thing that we were starting and connect with people who are most invested in our community about what that was. And, essentially it felt like we were shopping around this project or this idea to friends and curators and peers in Philadelphia and elsewhere. Um, and many of the funding opportunities or programmatic opportunities that we had in our first couple of years really came out of that period of time. And this exploratory moment, we hosted this pop-up at Reading Terminal Market, which is the central image here, that like allowed us, the budget from that allowed us to buy initial inventory of stock. And it was really exciting where we were like, oh, wow, these are the books that we ordered and they're here. And, the shop won't exist for a while, but, and what we sold that day allowed us to buy more books. And it also gave us a budget to build some of the first furniture that we constructed. And a lot of those opportunities just came from conversations with different curators and stakeholders in the city and who told us and tipped us off to things that were happening and ways to sort of get the word out. And then, oh yeah, this image on the bottom right is also from the Reading Terminal Market event. It was like we kind of took over a parking space in Reading Terminal Market. I don't know if this is a thing in other cities, but it's called like Parking Day or something, where like different projects or something take over particular parking spaces and do something meaningful with them. So it was a parking space sized bookshop for pop-up for a day. And then, these offers were really tremendously helpful too when we were launching a crowdfunding campaign eventually, which I guess we didn't make our total. So I don't know how much you can trust my experience here. But the initial inventory in our first round of programming really was made possible by this. And I think, having these conversations and having these early projects kind of allowed people in the community to know like, oh, this is something that there was a proof of concept, and this is something that will yield dividends for them. And if they're invested in that kind of thing happening in the world. So yeah, that's this idea of anti-institutional and how that functioned. The other ones are much shorter. I think they all get shorter and shorter and shorter, I think. So maybe we can have questions and further discussion as we go. So B is for burnout. All right. Yeah. Here we go. So one of the perennial issues and consistent challenges in any project, small scaled in particular, is burnout, right? Like burnout to me relates to questions of sustainability and kind of clarifying what this term of sustainability means for you. When we shifted Ulises from an LLC to a nonprofit a couple of years ago, we were really motivated by this question of like what it would mean to move from being like what we thought of as a project to being what we thought of as an organization. So this is a very abstract question, and it's not one that we've entirely resolved. It's something that we're thinking about through with the support of our insight of our board members. But for us, that was also connected to that definition of sustainability for us meant like, how could we create systems that someone else could step into without understanding the sort of idiosyncrasies of how the five of us worked and thought, that like, oh, when that's highlighted in that one Google Doc, that means that like, it's something that a book that I haven't ordered yet or something, but that I have emailed them, like, so that required the process, of course, documenting and systematizing how we approached everything that we did, the simple things like buying books or shop maintenance and email correspondence and how we set up for public events or updated the website and created new social media posts. So kind of creating these legible checklists and instructional documents that would allow someone else to step into some of these roles and even allow, and crucially, I think, allow another kind of collaborator within the organization, within the team to like take on tasks or and execute them that someone else in the group had been doing before. So it was a really simple thing, but something that like we found sort of challenging to do, and unless until we did it in a very kind of systematized way and had like a reason and concerted effort to do that. Yeah, and you know, this ultimately was a way of enabling a future in which, well, in my mind, I shouldn't speak for others, a future in which like it wasn't just a kind of group of five friends running the show, but that this could be a project that could potentially scale up to involve other people who could replace us, you know. But for you, that question of sustainability and how to prevent and negotiate burnout might look very different and might be kind of asking, you know, how rigid or flexible do I want to maintain this project? You know, like clarifying specifically too, like what is flexibility? Is it a work schedule? Is it a meeting frequency question? A frequency of commitments to the projects or work hours? How many public events feel feasible? How many fairs? How many posts? And really committing a lot of that to language might be what it looks like for you, and writing that down, documenting your responses in sense of that. And I think a key to combating burnout for us was really measuring and tracking this process, and that being like a process of introspection. Oh, I'm seeing there's lots of things in the chat. Oh wait, cool. Sorry, I haven't been following along. Um, but yes, someone's dealing with burnout and haven't even started. Yeah, that's real. Oh man. There are many things I haven't started yet, and I feel like I'm already uh, have burnout from. That's so wild. But yeah, for you know, for us, a lot of kind of key questions in addition to kind of tracking and measuring this process was, you know, weighing on the one hand, like what extent of activity feels impactful for one, and then that against like what extent of activity feels sustainable and like something that you could keep doing, like if you had to like maintain this as a practice for a year or two or three, you know, like and I have to say that for most of us, I would guess that like those thresholds are not going to align, you know, like your eyes will be bigger than your stomach. You know, like either circumstance, one might need to examine where the shortfall is and the capacity between your capacity and your vision and you know, your vision of activity or productivity or output. And I think from there, you know, it became for us like a question of thinking about how to adjust that, you know, whether that means taking a step back in your level of activity and production, or maybe taking time to focus on health and wellness, returning to support systems, whether that's friends and relatives or chosen family, or you know, communicating to them what your needs are to make this vision sustainable, you know, and having language that kind of clarifies that. For us was really key, and might be for you as well. And then, yeah, I think answering that question is also a question for me of like, what is activity? You know, what does that mean in specific terms? What number of publication? What number of hours working a week? And, you know, how to create a regular interval in the project's timelines and on your personal calendar to check in and adjust the level of activity when needed. And yeah, for us, it was also accepting seasons and embracing flexibility. Um, and I think that's going to look very different for people who create, you know, in projects that have internal partners like Ulises versus folks who are working in a way that might feel more independent to for their work. And yeah, the questions will be different. Like I'm taking a family trip in the summer, and that impacts when I have to schedule major deadlines, or you know, I'm acknowledging that I work in the day with a job that has certain levels of flexibility at these points, but not at those others, and navigating those questions and being honest and frank about them. And once we figured out these questions about capacity in terms of output, you know, it really helped us build a timeline of what a year looked like. And I'm sure it would help for you as well, like finding out benchmarks for a time period and looking ahead and assessing what the kind of pain points and bottlenecks might be in the capacity or work schedule. Okay, Cindy says, mainly, how do you have the time for the art? with this incredible real work marketing work? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for us at Ulysses, I feel like we are in a very strange position where like our work is being a platform, it's being a platform to support other people for doing things. So maybe there was like a level of distance between us as like organizers and creators of this initiative and like a lot of the nature of like making work. I do think that a lot of people in the group who are artists, I don't want to say past tense, who are artists, have found it very difficult to maintain a practice over the time of working on this. And I don't know, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I don't know, I'm not someone who has a lot of kind of training or work experience with like marketing as such. So I guess I can only speak more abstractly to this as a question of like building community and being present for a public. And that is the kind of promotional aspects of the work. And I think for us, it was like deeply integrated. That work was deeply integrated into what we were as a model, that like we organize exhibitions and events, and we need to get people to come to those things. So like the promotional aspect was a part of like the work, yeah, yeah, exactly. The platform is the art, yeah. But yeah, if you have more to say about that, Cindy, please definitely please jump in. Um, And then, the next kind of node in this conversation for me was this idea of community mapping, which, it's really not a term that we used in initiating Ulysses. This is an image of the team, I think from the 2025 New York Art Book Fair. I feel like it's definitely the New York Art Book Fair, but I don't know if it's 20 or 2023. I don't know if it's 23 or 22. Um, but yeah, I think it was really key in hindsight, this idea of mapping one's community, mapping one's relationships with their community to how we were able to leverage skills and resources and support from friends and colleagues in Philadelphia. It's, how we were able to build out the space. It was how, from shopping around the idea to artists and friends in the city and connecting with an artist named Tim Belknap, who eventually became, not only our landlord, but someone who was a champion of the project, provided a really dirt cheap space for us to have the first location. And, gave us some, built out the space in many respects, introduced us to local grant opportunities. And I think so many other artists who we connected with through our work were able to support us in that way. And, community mapping was also crucial to how we transitioned to an LLC. We we received like guidance from folks in our network, from former colleagues from institutional roles we had had in art museums. And, network contacts introduced us to pro bono legal counsel that could help us transition through, such as the Philadelphia lawyers, volunteer lawyers for the arts. And we also kind of built the team initially and found each other through a process of community mapping. And, I met Ricky and Narissa through friends and previous projects that we had done at like the Philadelphia's Asian Arts Initiative. I worked with Lauren at ICA in Philadelphia. I knew Kayla also through like the kind of ICA University of Pennsylvania community, where Kayla is an instructor, and we were in touch, via a former colleague and mentor. And we kind of like, unlike a lot of other projects in Philadelphia, we didn't go to grad school or undergrad together. We kind of just found each other in the city because we were both unified. We were all unified by this kind of shared vision of what we wanted to do together. And for you, community mapping might be asking a different set of questions. It might be if you're toward the early stages of a project where you're defining some of the scope of what you want to do and who you want to do it for. It might be asking questions like, who's your team? friends, family, school contacts, neighbors, people who have contributed to past projects that you've been a part of, former colleagues, academic advisors, and simply like map out what that looks like, draw it out, creating concentric circles of support, identifying people on paper by name, and even before you contact them accordingly, or you could start to do that if it feels like it's helpful for you to reach out to a few safe folks and figure out what kind of question, what things that you don't know and that you don't know, um, and kind of expanding your team to include folks, and that can be a casual setting, um, reminders, to schedule coffee with someone or formalizing an advisory committee for a longer term project. Before we had a board, we kind of had an informal group of folks who provided that role for us. And yeah, and I think one key for us was really kind of listing that out and putting that in writing. I think a lot about like the idea of like creative and intellectual allies and who those are, like creating spreadsheets of artists who you're interested in working with, like-minded makers, academic stakeholders in your area of focus. Another key question is asking, along with like, who's your team, like, who are your peers? And I think I would say like, those can be like current or aspirational, and I would come up with a sense of, we found it productive to come up with a list of both, like, aspirational peers might be people whose work you admire, but you might not be 1 degree of separation from, and maybe they're doing things that are similar to you. Maybe they're like 5 or 10 years further along, whatever that means, in whatever timeline you've created you've imagined for yourself about like the trajectory of your time in the field. Or yeah, and current might be like people who you have some proximity to, or it could not be. It could be people who, yeah, yeah, you no longer are kind of in immediate proximity to. And then I think, along with like, who's your team, who's your peers, who is your public, like this might be like general or specific terms. I think like a lot of the things that were helpful for us in writing grants, and I'm sure you found this to be the case in your own work, is sometimes that language kind of clarifies. It makes you ask questions that you uh, answer questions that you like wouldn't have otherwise answered, and being like, oh, okay, who, who is this for, or something, where like, and the specificity that you start to create when you ask like how you define your audience starts to get really exciting. And then I think as you've probably all seen from work that you've done, like for us, at least with Ulises, there's like a way in which the uh the audience starts to get very specific, right? Like where like there were definitely moments in the life of the project where like I was buying a book for um um for Becky. It was like I like knew the people who were interested. I mean, it wasn't for Becky, but it was someone like that. It was like I knew the people who would, in a very granular, specific terms, who would be invested in a thing that we would buy, or a project or show that we were working on, and that got really exciting. And then, yeah, I think it's also, not just about mapping social relationships and collegial relationships, but assessing your access to institutional resources, right? Like friends who work at print shops or Rezo studios, or who have expertise in editing software, just how the editing software, or who have a job where they can print vinyl for you or bind something, or folks who have copy editing expertise, or work at bookshops and galleries that, have chairs that you might need for like an event that you're doing at a place that needs more chairs, or like a PA for a project that you're working on and need to amplify. So yeah, writing down these folks who can really illuminate, and these like necessary resources for us was so illuminating in terms of clarifying what our like next physical actions were for reaching our goals, and for kind of partnerships and programming. Yeah, I mean, and also like it's interesting. I often think that what we call the art world is really like a matrix of of like intersecting institutions, like whenever people are like, oh, such a coincidence, you also know Marco. I'm like, yeah, because like are so, the gatekeeping mechanisms are often institutional structures. Like it's like, yeah, you went to school with that person, or like you did the residency together, or like you were in that fellowship program together, or like you exhibit at the same gallery, or you worked at the same museum, like and I think that there's a downside to that, and particularly as a feature of like highly kind of institutionalized and professionalized arts landscapes where there aren't those kind of like wiggle kind of ways to bore in or something, and people look at you from the outside of the weird. But I also think like you can exploit that kind of uh unfortunate accumulation of like expertise and human capital and actual capital that towards institutions. And one way we've found that was to like, maybe students who are interested in internship opportunities, then they can get involved and want to get involved with publishing, and they can receive compensation or credit through a university system, and check in with writing programs or art schools or academic programs in your area, that have affiliates, maybe that you have affiliations with, or, strong relationships with. I think that's something that kind of worked out a lot for us with the University of Pennsylvania, through fellowship programs that they had there, and kind of students who received payment for summer work placements that they did with us. And this was before we became a formal nonprofit. So it's not something that like we needed to do. We needed to be special folks to do or something like that. And, of course, for us also, like a lot of the partnerships and community building that we did came out of like professors and university administrators that we knew who like brought classes through the shop and like introduced their students to the work that we were doing, and relationships that we cultivated there. But then also who like, we teamed up with because they had funding to make some kind of programmatic opportunity possible. So kind of plugging into that or piggybacking off of that for some one purpose or another. Yeah, and community mapping for us also related to like creating partnerships and forging partnerships. Speaking of academic institutions, we've had this really fruitful partnership with the University of, well, with the dance program now at Bennington, formerly at the University of the Arts, which was an art school in Philadelphia that abruptly closed, maybe a few months ago. And yeah, we connected with them to organize this kind of reading room as part of a summer study program and public project that they had there called the for Temporary Liveness, which was hosted at the Philadelphia Art Alliance. And they kind of, I don't know how they were originally informed about our work. Yeah, I can't exactly say, but I think their program focuses a lot on like kind of research-based practices as a way of like as an avenue and a space for dancers to create experimental works. So we connected a lot over like our shared interests and concerns with like different modes of like experimental citation and experimental kind of readers and pedagogical strategies. Yeah, and I think as a if one is a publisher, the process of community mapping and forging partnerships might look very different. It might be like looking up lists of bookshops that you could email to share your work with, or even kind of visit and connect with, or meet when they're in town for like the New York Art Book Fair or something, if you like their vibe. And we've definitely done that a lot for different reasons. And I love to spend a lot of time on like distributors' websites because they like for like we're a bookseller, so we buy wholesale publications from distributors like Antenna Books or Idea Books. And like they'll have like extensive catalogs of all the publishers that they distribute. And for each of them, they'll say like places that carry those publishers' work. So it's almost super fun for me to like go to those websites and say like, oh, who's carrying books by Bedford Press, and be introduced to this like kind of landscape of peer booksellers, usually like independent shops and things. And and often they'll be like organized by geography. So I'll be like, oh, I had no idea there was this other cool shop in Pittsburgh that I didn't know about, or in Philadelphia that I didn't know about, that was selling work and publications that I'm interested in. Yeah. And, for us, a lot of this meant like kind of reverse engineering the work and trajectories of people and projects that we admired. what led them to be where they are, kind of like for people looking at their like CVs and resumes and which grants and fellowships they applied to and received. It's like Are You My Mother or something, if you those fans of children's books. But like what are the bookshops and museum stores and project spaces that carry publications that inspire you? That was a question we kind of asked ourselves a lot in our work, and made pretty extensive lists. And I'm sure, for you, that might be, we found that to be super transformational. For you, it might not be, museum stores and project spaces that carry publications. It might be like other artists, other writers and editors. And maybe I think a big part of it too for us was attending fairs and finding our community there. Like as a bookseller, as I mentioned, we sell wholesale publications, or we purchase wholesale publications. So our relationship to fairs is different, where we're going there, we are seeing, we're bringing publications that we sell to the general public. Then often we like, stock up and purchase things that we found at the fair, and would bring that back to Philadelphia with us. And, often it was publishers who work we had kind of connected with online, and we're, typically ordering their books based off a JPEG that we saw or something. But, it's great to be able to connect with those folks and put a name to a face and build community that way, and learn how we can like support each other's work through that. But of course, um, attending fairs can be difficult or costly, depending on the price of participating. But I know a lot of them are also creating really exciting new initiatives and fellowship programs, like I know Print and Matter has, to allow folks who are from underrepresented backgrounds or who have, financial hardship to offset some of those costs, particularly people, who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, but also like folks from sort of the global South who have a lot of barriers. So that's a really encouraging note. Um, but yeah, and I think even like reaching out to fair organizers and introducing yourself was really cool and helpful for us. Asking, friends for support was key, who had done those fairs before, and like the lay of the land and what to expect, how many things to bring, like um uh yeah, how to approach it, the questions you might not the things you might not know that you don't know. But yeah, it's been exciting to engage in that space. I was telling Camilo and Tyler before we started that like I really adored like smaller fairs, like Odds and Ends, which used to be at the Yale Art Book Fair, or I think the Drawdown folks used to organize that, or like Multiple Editions, which I think they do now. And a big part of that energy and community of like Odds and Ends is kind of now part of multiple formats in Boston. And yeah, we found it to be a really valuable place to meet community. I mean, I think, yeah, like I said, it's very different for a publisher than a bookseller to go to these fairs. I think as a bookseller, we always thought like, oh, what are the things that we're carrying that like maybe people in Philadelphia made, and we can kind of be a platform for them in this other city. Um, and you might ask yourself some of the same questions as well, where like you're yeah, maybe as a way of like offsetting some of the costs that might be involved in going to a fair, you could like have a table or and share it with another publisher, or like work out a situation where you're like representing a broader range of work by other writers and editors in that way. Um, what else? Yeah, maybe I'll just go to the next section. We're almost done. This next one is done by 10, which is kind of like tongue in cheek. This is like a mantra for our weekly meetings. For years, we'd have these regular meetings that started at 9. I don't know why. I think it's just because it was the time that we thought we would all be free after our other commitments and dinner and things and working late. And then eventually we moved it to 8:30, which we thought was like very humane. We were like, oh my goodness, yes, we're so civilized now that we're doing it. But I think done by 10 was this like promise of like, oh my goodness, yeah, we got to be done with the meeting by 10. Let's make it an efficient one. Secret, we never really finished by 10. But, on the image on the right is like from our weekly agenda, that I mentioned earlier. And it was a space where we would put in recurring bullets that um, for ongoing projects and tasks. But it was also a playful place where we teased and roasted each other. And these kinds of like Google Docs and centralized documents were so key for our work, and really where so much of the project lives, and in the network of endless hyperlinks between documents that we've created over the years and put in shared folders. And I think, the consistency of this meeting was what made it work, like our kind of like weekly Monday meetings. It was a place that we could kind of check in and move tasks along. There were definitely like moments where I was super busy, where I would be like, oh my goodness, the meeting is tonight. I have to do the thing I said I was going to do by this meeting. So the regularity of it kind of posed this helpful deadline. I think there was this session in the meeting, one of the meetings where like someone was like, yeah, I had like perfect attendance when I was in school. And then like slowly everyone else was like, oh, wait a minute, me too, like me too. And it was such like a funny like moment and anecdote because I think a lot of things that make someone a great collaborator are actually kind of like unsexy. No one's gonna like meet someone at a bar or like an opening and be like, oh my God, I met the most amazing person. They were so freaking consistent. It's like that's not a trait that immediately displays itself upon first glance. It's kind of something that unfolds over time. And I think a lot of like what worked with this project was our incredible attendance. We're like just the consistency that we were able to maintain as a group of people, that we're still unruly and messy, but also hard workers through all of that. And another feature of the weekly meeting is that because it happened over Zoom, there was actually a window where we would meet over the phone for a long time. And I don't know how we did that. I think like Lauren didn't have internet in her new place for like at least a year, maybe two. Uh, I don't know how she lived like that, but like it was yeah, we just had it over the phone, which is I think a testament to the level of trust and just and familiarity that we developed over that time. But yeah, I think because a couple of us don't live in Philadelphia and so much of the project happens over the internet, in terms of correspondence and planning, these moments like fairs or large events where we can get together really made it all the more special and kind of like a celebration between all of us. Um, Maybe just in the last like 5 or 10 minutes, I'll share a couple more ideas that have been kind of key for our work. One is this term that we actually say a lot. Unlike anti-institutionalism, we don't really say that. That's kind of like a thing that I think about a lot. But like I feel like apotocracy was another kind of mantra throughout, has been another kind of mantra throughout our work, and which is an idea, it's a made-up word, another one. The logic behind this is just the idea that like self-organized collective projects are effortocracies, meaning that they're kind of ruled by the people who invest the most effort, or said otherwise, the people who kind of can contribute the most time or energy or attention to a project's management. And the beauty of an effortocracy is that there's a kind of a direct relationship between what you get from a project and what you give to it, right? And the downside of an effortocracy is that, our capacities are always subject to external pressures and the material realities of capitalism. Certain folks in the group might have way more time affluence or actual affluence than others, while others might have to work like two jobs and pay bills, or like have childcare or elder care responsibilities, or have impairments and disabilities, or be neurodivergent, or need to step away for other social commitments. These inequalities and impairments affect how someone can invest in an independent project. Maybe this relates to this idea of burnout, and can be compounded, obviously. I mean, I shouldn't say obviously. Everyone has different experiences. Can be compounded by race, class, and gender, as many of us know. Part of the question of effortocracy for us and has meant kind of clarifying structure and identifying roles, and maybe that'll be the case in your collective projects and how you approach that. And for us at Ulises, in the first few years, we did get it locked into like giving roles to locked into our given roles in a kind of organic way that was based on the kind of interest and skills that I alluded to, where like Narissa ran the public messaging on Instagram and shaped the creative direction of the shop visually and directed a lot of the meetings and course of the project with so much grace. And, Kayla and I worked on book orders and worked on a lot of the language and conceptualization for the curatorial program. And Ricky, worked on the logistics and shop management and operations and documentation, and Lauren kind of shouldered so much of the work around like and kind of the administrating of this project and asking critical questions of our work and also finance and taxes because she's got those skills from her undergrad. Um, but I think one thing about creating more legible systems and kind of sustainable structures is that allowed us to allow other people to kind of slip into those different roles and yeah, decide collectively about how we were making posts and edit them and draft that curatorial language or social media posts together and have other people kind of take the lead on hosting events or organizing programming and curatorial initiatives and I think that's kind of made the project stronger and much more flexible and adaptable. Um, yeah, this question of effortocracy is so connected with labor and equity politics that show up, I think, also in that kind of also show up in our program. A lot of projects that we did and do kind of reflect a commitment to questions of social urgency like migration or reproductive health rights, collective organizing, anti-imperial and anti-war activism, and things like that. Um, Oh, Kareem, that's cool. Um, it's in the lexicon, it's in the canon. So F is for failure. Oh man, this is kind of like burnout, but it's a little different. And I think it's just exactly what it sounds like for us. This image is from the left is kind of a heap of what was the first building that we were in after it was sold and we had to move and it was subsequently demolished and we kind of didn't have a permanent space for a long time. And then the one on the right is kind of before, I guess the building was completely destroyed or maybe the doors were still up. And you can kind of see, oops, look through the this sign, Ulysses. Um, yeah, finding ways to redefine failure and success on your own terms, I think has been super key for us and might be for you as well. Like setting intentions on like a weekly, daily, if you want to, monthly level of what you want to measure and what you want to define as like, a job well done. And adjusting and improving that as you go and checking in. Yeah, and embracing the fact that things will break from time to time. Promises, projects, you name it, and like that not every project needs to exist forever. Yeah. And there are times to accept that when we're working on something, we'll strategically fail. I think it's important to strategically fail and kind of decide, if what are the things that I'm willing to let drop, in moments that I can't do everything, and kind of reflecting upon that. And yeah, I think also a lot of this is tied into my approach to the time that I was in Philadelphia and the time that was like most engaged with Ulises, which was like what it means to work contextually and to acknowledge how the realities of like an arts ecosystem shape your projects. Like when I worked a couple of years ago, I worked on this arts nonprofit called Recess, and we were part of this like consortium of other small scale organizations called Common Practice that was like I think modeled on a London or at least a UK based organization of the same name. And it was really this idea that like New York is an arts ecosystem that can support these like really ginormous, to use the technical term, art institutions like MoMA or the Met or, by national standards, the Whitney art is a huge institution. And then even on the private sector, like Gagosian and, Zwirner, and that like the way to get projects and initiatives that were experimental and transformative and inclusive and responsive is actually like scaling down structures and making institutions that are too big to fail kind of smaller and more nimble. And investing in those that were already working at that scale, not in the interest of having them be grow into big institutions, like grown-up institutions, but like to have them kind of work at that really specific level. And, maybe, and I think in Philadelphia, in the context there, it definitely felt like a very different problem, where like a lot of the work that we were called to do felt it was related to like scaling up, like taking, folks who didn't have like to get work that was inclusive and, responsive and experimental. It really took a matter of like investing more robustly in like infrastructure and support and so that like, yeah, my friends who just graduated and opened a gallery together, would take really nice install images of the show that they did with their friend so that that person has that for their own purposes and that they have it as an art space, or writes a really nice press release, that they invested a lot of time in, and, does, more studio visits with people that didn't go to school with them so that their program is more diverse and inclusive and representative of the city. Yeah, and I think a lot of what we've done with Ulises in Philadelphia was kind of rooted in this idea of like um, uh, how to redefine the terms of what success and failure meant like for us, and how to do that in a way that was responsive to the context and arts ecosystem of the city. And this is from A to G, so I'm gonna kind of just jump ahead to the final node, which is this idea of generosity, at um, yeah, this project, Ulises, this organization, it's benefited so much from the generosity of this really incredible community. It's fueled by that community, the advice, the patronage, the literal dollars for books that they gave, the artists, writers, designers who organized projects with us and helped launch their project with us. And I think, we feel really responsible to that community and paying it forward. And I think, as you approach your own work, I think it might be helpful to ask your own questions about like that relationship to generosity and like, who demands your A game, who's your vision for, who are you supporting, who is different because you did your work, who needs your best work. And those are really answering those questions for me and Ulises was incredibly animating for how my level investment in the project and what could be done within it. And I think it relates to audience and public and community building. And yeah, and also an idea of what values do you want your project do you want your project to have and reflect? Yeah, so at Ulises, we kind of staged this, we recently staged a project that attempted to bring to life the kind of generosity of the people who belong to our community of bookmakers, zinesters, designers, writers, artists, publishers, etc. And we called this project Ulises Assembly. It's still on view at Tufts University Art Gallery right now. CSND, thanks for joining. For the project, we asked like 1,000 artists and artist collectives and independent presses to kind of send us an example of the kinds of books that they make, reaching out to folks in our network. And the result was kind of like assemblage or assembly of publications and multiples that ranged in subject and form, things that were zines and artist books to, a basketball and tote bags and baseball hats and sculptural forms that were textile, wood, or paper. And that really kind of mapped what independent publishing was to us in our community today. And a lot of the project kind of responded to this call from a historical call from Ulises Carry On, in which he asked, bookmakers to send, quote, the kinds of books you make, end quote. For us, the responses that we got were geared around this question that you see on screen, like, what do you do? And I think for us, it was like wrapped in with ideas of labor and like the invisible laborers, who create publications. And, there's this kind of canonical idea and text by Ulises called Bookworks Revisited. And we wanted to think, not by Ulises us, but Ulises Carry On, the kind of conceptual artist. But like, yeah, we wanted to think about the role of the book workers, not just the book works, but the book workers, and to think about what it meant to center them and to create this like experience that was like part residency, part programming space, part study room, part bookshop, part archive. And yeah, I think that is a key part of like understanding the role of generosity in your own work, might be finding the kind of key questions to define your work and assessing whether and how those questions and values are related in your practice. And then I'll also just kind of finally say that like, for us, programming was a big part of like how we think about the role of generosity in shaping our work. You know, we had the benefit of a space which allows us to like nimbly bring together people to host a diverse array of contributors to projects, and really be responsive to our interests. So, you know, in the first year or two that we operated, we had this kind of quarterly model in which we adopted the model of like a magazine in space, of being like, oh, we were going to adopt a T term and kind of program a series of activities under that, kind of going back to this Arabic root of the term magazine as like a storehouse, you know, this container for an eclectic and disparate range of content that was unified by a specific concept or idea. And yeah, that's kind of how we functioned in this first couple years, like these quarterlies that invited contributors to present publications and workshops and lectures and artworks on the given theme. And then, you know, we kind of shifted to this model of like publishing as practice, this kind of 2 year long experimental art publisher, a residency that invited hardworking, good-looking Martine Sims and Dominica and Badoon to like think about the stakes and status of publishing today. But yeah, I think we're now in this new moment of like transition where we've moved to this new space and a residential building in Philadelphia called Ray, and thinking about like what the next steps will be. And as we're doing that, I think we're thinking also about sustainability in new ways. And I think for me, sustainability is it's really not about like kind of a project existing in perpetuity, but really in this idea of like the transferability of the work that you do. And a lot of this idea of this project at Tufts of like, what do you do? Or of how we think about like generosity in the work is like what can be preserved and what can be passed on and passed forward. And for me, kind of the mantra of that is like how to leave a community better than how you arrived, and to create and support structures of mentorship and encouragement that shapes the kind of culture that you want to see flourish in the places that you hold dear, and kind of adopt a set of ethics that reflect that sense of responsibility. Yeah, so I think with that, I'll just, that's kind of the end of my slides. That's Ulysses. So yeah, if there's time left, we can talk more and chat more, but I think I'm gonna stop sharing, and yeah, just say thanks for everyone for being here and giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about this work.
Thank you, G. That was amazing.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I know, it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, so I think we can open it up for questions. If you guys want to put in the chat or unmute yourselves, whatever you prefer. Okay, it looks like we got a question in the chat from Fox. Can you talk about best practices for painting partnerships?
That's a good question. Yeah, Fox, could you say more?
Maintaining.
Maintaining? Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Fox, can you say more about that question? Or if you want to. Yeah,
Yeah,
like yeah.
curious, like if you do a project with someone, and it feels like it was meant to be just like it was just like a one-time project, like after the project is over, how do you go about staying connected to that person and like leaving the door open for further collaboration. And
Yeah.
like, do you like do you create, like, is there like a rubric type of system you've created as far as like to kind of tell you, you know, how it went, like if it was a good partnership, you know, how do you like, yeah, basically
Yeah.
that.
That's such a great question. I love the way you kind of situated it. Like the things that immediately came to mind is, yeah, I loved how you phrased this idea of like how to leave the door open. Yeah, the things that came to mind for me are like, um, what levels, what kind of like thresholds of connection kind of are, and like for us in Ulysses, like one is like, you know, selling a publication, like selling a book that somebody has. Another is like programming an event with them. And, you know, another might be like resharing something that they posted that's important to them, or forwarding an email for an issue that they're advocating, or a work that they've created. And you know, not to create a hierarchy out of these, but I do think like they definitely have different levels of like, they all require like different levels of capacity. And a lot of times when we kind of like worked with someone, and to the extent that it felt like a partnership, it was something that kind of had the, yeah, maybe the kind of high, I don't know, highest isn't necessarily, it shouldn't, had this kind of deep, very deep level of like capacity and investment in terms of our, at least our time and resources. You know, like maybe we hosted folks like hardworking, good looking, this imprint of like publishers working in and out from of the Philippines and in the Filipino diaspora, hosted them in the space. And this was like a huge investment. You know, it was a residency. They were on site with us like day in, day out for like weeks. And, you know, we spent a lot of time planning what kind of programming they would do in the space. And they essentially like took over the programming of the space. Um, but yeah, I think like, you know, that is maybe like the highest level of like um partnership that that I can think of us kind of working on uh in the past several years. Um and I think like a lot of it, maybe the maintaining of that is happens like through a lot of informal channels, like in these kind of smaller ways that I was thinking of like, yeah, like circulating something that's really important to them, um, seeing them at like art book fairs and connecting and grabbing a drink. Um, yeah, programming something else with them. You know, one of the members of that collective is part of an organization in Utrecht in the Netherlands called BAK or Bach, and they kind of invited Ulysses folks to do a project there. So yeah, I think the relationship kind of continues in different ways, but maybe never really, maybe the occasion for that level of that depth of like of connection might not come again, but the pathway is there for that to happen. Um, and yeah, and I think it's been maintained in informal ways. But I think we definitely are like in a privileged position where there are so many different, because we have a space, because we have like, you know, we send out email blasts, we have like a social media presence, we have these many different like channels and of kind of like broadcasting and supporting other people and platforming, I guess is the word, platforming other people's work. You know, there are many occasions. I would say though that there's definitely like they've been like for I think it's been easier for like maintaining partnerships that are with artists or collectives or publishers or like cultural projects than I think maybe it's been for partnerships that we've tried to create that maybe are outside of that sphere. just because a lot of the ways, yeah. But I don't know if I have, yeah, there was one kind of partnership we had briefly with like something that was more like an educational group of young people who were in the area. And I think it just, once the kind of lead educator on that project sort of moved on from that institution, it sort of shifted our capacity. So yeah, maybe that can change things too, where, you know, your relationship, there might be instances where your relationship with an organization is like tethered by a singular individual. And once that person leaves, maybe that kind of connection is lost. And then there was another part of your question about like evaluating impact. That's a huge thing because it's like, it's, yeah, how do you measure? I think it's a challenge across the cultural field, you know, like uh, I'm sure the folks at CBA like submit grant applications where they have to say like detailed information about like how many people came to this or that event or, you know, this or that opening. And, you know, it's like, is that impact these like very quantifiable sort of metrics? You know, we can tell you how many people walked in the shop every day and how much people sold and how many people sold, how many things sold per day and sold per event and all of these kind of metrics. But it's harder to evaluate some of the kind of like um, qualitative feedback. Like people who enter the shop, most of them are not going to write a Google review or a Yelp review, and they're definitely not going to write like a 400-page critical, you know, review of in a publication about what their experience is. So a lot of our impact, a sense of impact from a project ends up being very anecdotal and kind of referring to other colleagues and peers in the field who are like, this was great, or conversely, like, why did you do that? So yeah, I think that's a challenge. Is like a lot of the ways that we have to evaluate the impact of cultural work is through anecdotal kind of qualitative means that might not be as quantitative as other forms of scientific data. But yeah, Fox has another question I'm reading for the first time as I read for you. I'm also curious about monetizing other people's work and how to avoid capitalist vibe with that. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky, yeah. Maybe I'll answer the question, and I would love for you to say more about it, or we could do the reverse. Because I think in our case with Ulysses, like um uh we don't care that, like we're never like, oh man, I have never looked like how much we've sold ever. Like I think every now and again we'll be like, oh man, do we not have enough in the bank account? And then like someone will be like, yes, we have enough. But like to like make a huge book order or something, if we have like, if we need to make a huge book order and then make another huge book order. But like, yeah, a lot of the people we're working with, they're really excited to sell their works. And you know, I think we're totally fine with the space just being a place that people hang out and read. And, you know, every now and again when people, I mean, I think people buy things pretty, you know, pretty consistently, but like when people buy things, we're like, that's cool. Now you get to read that thing whenever you want, or look at that thing whenever you want. Good, great. But it seems like Fox, is your question also about like that maybe there's something like, is your question also about like maybe specifically for folks who are publishers and work with contributors, or also about like maybe the extractive possibilities of working with artists and publishers, writers who create and contribute materials for publications?
Yeah, kind of like I'm curious if if I have like a group of writers, a small group of writers, and I would like to publish a chapbook featuring their work, and I'm selling the chapbook for like $20 a piece, and I end up selling like 100 copies. I want to make sure that those writers are being paid. So it's like paying them upfront or paying them based on sales. I'm a little bit confused about that part because I want to make sure that people are like paid for their creativity and labor. But I also want to make sure that my press is not losing money, because if I'm fronting the cost of like, you know, printing and ink and like binding and all that stuff. So I just like trying to figure out like the fairness of it so that it doesn't feel like I'm profiting off of someone else's work, but not I'm also like making sure that I'm taking care of, like my labor is also being valued at the same time.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it seems like there's kind of the two things that come to mind for me. One is around like questions of expectations and how to clarify expectations, like, and maybe some of that might relate to like how far one wants to like formalize and professionalize that kind of collaboration or working relationship. Like, is it something that does get a contract, like even if it's just like a Word document that you like export as a PDF and make together and say like this is how we're working together or something, or if it's communicated directly in an email and maybe that suffices and gives confidence for the people that you're working with. Yeah, I feel like the thing that it seems in your in the yeah in the way that this is described to me is that one of the most important things for you, it sounds like, is also like trust and ethics, you know, and how to do this in a way that feels ethical to the people that you're working with and to your own creative labor, and how to do it in a way that like sustains trust. So yeah, maybe like the two things that I would think of is like possibilities for navigating that is like finding a way to communicate like what your hope is and what your kind of needs are in terms of like making this sustainable for you as a project, and also like fun, and making sure you communicate in a way that like shows like your sense of investment and how meaningful and important it is. And the others I think might just be a matter of like finding out what like the kind of like industry standards are around it. Like I don't know if, yeah, there might be other mentors in this group that could speak to their experience, like particularly the folks who have worked on like literary publications or worked with contributors in some way. Like in the experiences that I've worked with within institutional contexts, they're much more, it's kind of much more about like someone is compensated a kind of like fee for their contribution based on like a word count or something like that, or you know, or something that has parity with what historically that institution or organization has paid people. Um, but that's a good question of like in terms of like royalties and for future sales or something like that. I don't know what in like a more independent art context what someone's expectations might be, and what at what level of production like questions around royalties seem to come up. I mean, I do know, you know, for instance, even like for multiples that, you know, I work at a big museum, for like multiples for a lot of things that will reproduce at even at MoMA, like the amount of money that is involved in like the amount of money that's involved in like royalties is so small that like it almost becomes like arguing over like, you know, $12 or something. So it could be a situation like that where, you know, because you're investing in the time and energy in the production of this, that it might not warrant that level, but that maybe agreeing to some kind of contributor fee is should be the priority. But Karina, were you going to say something? I saw you enter the
You saw me enter the screen. I've been listening
Yeah.
to you from behind the computer. And as a former publisher, I thought that, and somebody who works in an institutional context now, I thought I could also add, but I bet that there are probably other people on the call who could also add. When I was running small editions, the way I approached it was that I handled all of the production costs. And I didn't ask the artist or the writer or whoever was generating the content, I didn't ask them to contribute anything. And then there were two options. One option was that I would just give the artist half of the edition. And so that was one way of compensating them without me having to all of a sudden come up with cash that I didn't have. The other way that we did it, you know, when the artist really wanted me to take on the kind of like sales and like, you know, placement of the work, was that I would pay them 50% of every sale at the end of every sale. So like, and I was working with books that sometimes were more expensive. So maybe I'd be, you know, selling an artist book for, you know, $2,000 to a museum. And as soon as I got paid by the museum, I just like cut a check to the artist immediately. And I think it's really important as a publisher to really take care of the artists and the writers and the contributors that you're working with ASAP, because there are so many publishers in the world and there are so many gallerists in the world who will take advantage of the fact that artists and writers don't know how to stand up for themselves sometimes. And so I think it's really important to pay people as quickly as humanly possible. So when you can, giving books can be a really good way because they, you know, have that equal value and it's really easy to see parity between the two shares. But I know a lot of other publishers do it different ways. Like sometimes people go in 50-50, where the artist is helping to contribute to the, you know, financial burden of, you know, physically making it. Or the you know, actual making. They might be there helping to like staple zines or print things, and then, you know, they split things 50-50 similarly. So everybody has their own way. It just depends on whether or not, like what makes sense for you and what makes sense for your heart, because I think not everybody has the ability to like pay for everything up front when they're working with somebody, you know, like a big company does. Is there anybody else on the call that handles this differently?
I apologize. I feel like I'm asking too many questions, but I just have a quick follow-up question. I love the idea of giving the contributor or artist like half the edition. So is there also an agreement that whether I'm selling the pieces or they're selling, we're going to be selling them for the same price? Or does that make sense?
Yeah, I always did write that down and saying like me and the author or the artist would decide on a price, and usually it would be based on, you know, the cost of production plus, you know, trying to also take account everyone's labor, so the artist's labor, and also if you were going to be working with a distributor, they take a big cut. But yeah, so the idea was that essentially we would always be selling at the same price. And especially in a public context, like if you're putting it up on your website, it could never be for less than what me, the publisher, was doing. And then the other thing that I ended up doing often was that if I sold out really fast, because sometimes when you're a publisher, you, as G was mentioning, develop you know, strong relationships with you know, with bookstores or with distributors or with certain networks that are willing to take on your stock. So if you're able to sell out your portion as a publisher pretty quickly, you then have the cash to buy back books from the content producer. And that is actually, you know, a great way to kind of support people. Um, yeah, that was a great question.
Such a good question. Lindsay, were you going to add something too? I saw you.
I just, yeah, thanks, G. I just was gonna weigh in because I also am a publisher and I'll talk more about distribution tomorrow night. But I think in terms of model, like similar to Karina, I fund the work that I publish and have a model that is established upon each project. The model is the same. In very rare circumstances, I have worked in some different methods, like in terms of structure and financing, especially when there's grants involved or people have outside funding. But generally, as the publisher, like I am fronting the money to make the project. And then once the project meets proceeds, paying back 50-50, like split as if it were consignment, and paying the artist and also giving the artist 15% of the edition upfront. So it's a pretty, from my understanding, in like the community that we're all in, it's rare to have a publisher give you that much of the edition and also finance it. And I think that just brings up questions of ethics and the importance of like what we value and how we value artists, especially as an artist from project. Like I'm an artist, so I don't want to take advantage of other artists. It's really important.
Yeah, that's key. Camilo, I know you're on the call. I'm curious how you handle this with Calypso.
Yeah, well, we usually work, it also depends on the amount of like on the run and how much you're going to be distributing, because as you said before, some distributors take up to 60% of the cost, like for retailers and distribution. So usually we cover the costs, and it ends up being somewhere around 15% for each of us, for the publisher and the printer. Sorry, the publisher and the artist. And yeah, we cover the costs up front.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to jump in
So
because I'm
much.
like
Yeah, that was
listening and I'm like, I know so much about this. I'm still in the room, but I'm gonna step back over so I can hear my thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see we are just over time. So thank you so much, everyone. This was really engaging. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, G. I thought it was a really great talk and so insightful. And I hope everyone else enjoyed it as well because it was really, really impactful. So thank you so much. This recording will be posted online, and I will send everyone a link to the recording. So if they want to watch it back, you're always more than welcome to. So yeah, so thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Thanks, Karina. Thanks, Camilo. Thanks, everyone. This is
Thank
really
you. And
you.
maybe we should also mention that tomorrow we have it's Lindsay's lecture, right?
Yes. So we have 3 other lectures that will be taking place for the rest of the week. One is with Lindsay, who you guys see here, who is talking a bit about some stuff they'll be covering tomorrow. So yeah, I can send a link to everyone. It's also on our website. If you go to our events page, let me see if I can put that in the chat really quick while we are all here. Give me 1 second. So I'm just going to link our events page, and on there you will see all of the other 3 upcoming talks that again are all free to attend, but donations are always welcome, and all virtual as well. So we have 3 other ones upcoming, and they're all labeled with Small Press Incubator Lecture Series. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks for running. See ya.
Thank you.
No, not at all, Fox. Those were awesome questions. Thank you.
Thanks, G.
Yeah,
See
thank you.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.